Well, hang on. Our great friend David Leroy joining us here. Mr. Leroy, good to have you with us in studio. Phone number is 580-5436, 580-KIDO. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome, Kevin. Delighted to be with you here, a mere 40 days away from our primary election on May 15th.
You know, we were such a fountain of knowledge. We were talking about James Comey a minute ago, but and possibly we'll get to that. But more importantly, let's talk about this race that you've dedicated yourself to once again don the mantle of public servant to make your case to the voters. Where are we at right now in your race, sir?
Well, it's a 7-way race, technically speaking. We have 7 candidates on the ballot. Our most recent polling says that there's about 40% undecided and shows quite clearly that it's a 2-way race between myself and Russ Fulcher. Everybody else in the race in our poll, which was 595 respondents approximately 3.5 weeks ago, everybody else is in the single digits, and Russ and I are neck to neck with about 40% of the vote decided in our 2 favors.
You know, and then we take a look at, we were talking about, you know, the undecideds, whether it's in the race for Congress or for governor or lieutenant governor. You're so well known. Russ Fulcher is so well known. We're talking essentially, and again, with respect to the rest of the district, Ada and Canyon counties, to me, it's hard to believe that we have people that are undecided so heavily, considering we have 2 well-known candidates. Then we have Christy Perry, and we have others that have been known for quite some time in our own area.
Well, one problem we've had in the congressional race is people haven't focused on it.
Yeah.
They're focused on the governor's race. And, in fact, because Raul Labrador's coming home, vacating the Congress race and running for governor, and as a part of the discussion in the governor's race, a lot of people don't perceive the next back question, who's running for Congress, or is there a Congress race? So when I tell people I'm running for Congress, more often than not, or at least as often as not, people have to compute, oh, yes, there is a Congress seat. And then the next question is, who are you running against? When I mention that there are 6 other people, their eyes glaze over. So we do need to continue to press that there is a race for Congress. And in my opinion, that race for Congress, this race in which I am, is more important to the outcome of people's lives and pocketbooks than is the governor's race, in fact.
Isn't that amazing, though, that you that have been involved in public service for so long, and we who cover this, that most folks aren't focused as much as they should be? You know, we're going, well, we've got this person, this person, this person, and yet you probably go down a cul-de-sac or a neighborhood and people couldn't tell you who's running.
Well, part of it, I think, too, is issues and the pace with which issues change in this country these days. A good, long-lived political issue lasts about 15 minutes. And that's a tragedy, because we don't end up resolving public problems and we don't end up creating new public policies. We simply kick these problems down the road until their 15 minutes comes back around an hour later.
David Leroy with us, 580-5436, 580-KIDO. He'll take your calls. But I have to ask you this. Now, we had Michael Snyder in here earlier this morning. He said he's more Trump than you.
Well, Michael is a young man of strongly held opinions, and I have become quite friendly with him. We enjoy each other's company. The Trump I propose to use is Trump the change agent. Donald Trump represents a spectacular opportunity for this country to begin to address some of these long-lived problems about which I just spoke that have never been resolved. If we put conservative legislation in front of Donald Trump, he'll sign it. And so I want to use Donald Trump as a change agent, and that's exactly why I'm coming off the bench after 20 years of Citizen Dave, to try to capture this Republican nomination to be the next congressman from Idaho, because our Congress, this House of Representatives, is where all the action is going to start in the next 2.5 years. And if we can put fiscally responsible legislation, if we can put laws that change the underlying statutes under which all of this extra regulation was created, if we can put those kinds of things in front of Donald Trump, he'll sign them. And that's the Trump I want, Trump the change agent.
When we take a look at the change that's coming in the House of Representatives, going from Citizen Dave, even when you're Citizen Dave, though, you're still involved in public policy, still involved in making a difference here in the state of Idaho. And as a student of history, as a former public servant that, again, is coming back off the bench, what do you make of the historic change, not only in the U.S. Congress, but in the Idaho House and Senate. This is a big election.
Oh, absolutely. And as to the Congress, it's a spectacular opportunity for somebody with my long, broad, deep background as Attorney General, as a prosecutor, as Lieutenant Governor, as Acting Governor. And remember, I even ran a small federal agency for Bush 41 for 3 years. With that kind of background, I would expect to make an impression immediately, even as a freshman congressman. By my actual count, we have 61 members of the 115th Congress, this current Congress, who are not going to return by virtue of resignation or some other loss of their seat in a voluntary basis. And with that kind of vacancy, a freshman has the potential, if they'll focus on the right committees, to make a very significant impression right out of the chute. It's an exciting opportunity, and Idaho's first congressional district seat is in the mix to make that difference.
What do you make of Paul Ryan giving it up?
You know, I like Paul Ryan, the policy wonk. I like the fact that he's fact-driven. I agree with some of the criticisms of him that he's not been a strong enough leader, and he certainly hasn't hewn either the congressional conservative line or the President Trump line. I think it will probably be a very positive thing for the Congress to have a new speaker as soon as possible. And if he's going to serve out his term, then that's his decision, and the decision, of course, for the majority party in the Congress.
Let's go to the phones. David Leroy joining us here at KIDO Talk Radio, and we'll start with Dustin in Mountain Home. Dustin, good morning. You're on KIDO Talk Radio.
Hi, thank you for taking my call.
Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I got a comment/question for you. Most of the time I see when most people get in Congress or in the Senate, and they win by saying what they're going to vote for, what they're not going to vote for, and such. And in reality, later on, they end up voting against, or what seems to be against, what they promised. I'm wondering why senators or congressmen don't actually have like a blog or a website or something actually, being very transparent, saying, I voted for this or I did not vote for this, and this is why. Because there's a lot of people out there wondering why people vote the way they do.
Justin, I think that's a great comment, and it invites a couple of observations. Number one, I really don't need a long-term career in politics. I've already had one, so my proposition is I'm going to make the tough votes, and I'm going to explain to people why. The second part of your observation is that there are so many new methods of communication by which a congressman can keep his constituents informed, and I think that all of those should be utilized. It's certainly possible, instead of flying back on a given weekend, to make 3 or 4 appearances by video conference within the district. So you're right. We not only need to stay in touch and both communicate and also listen using modern electronic devices. I think it's incumbent upon the congressman to have a continuing dialogue, perhaps even before votes are made, to the extent that that can be done on major issues. Good comment.
Thank you.
All right, Dustin, let's go to Doug in Mountain Home with David Leroy at 580-5436, 580-KIDO. Good morning, Doug.
Good morning. Yeah, Mr. Leroy, I just got a question. Listening to you saying that, you're pro-Trump. I mean, I think this guy, and Kevin's heard me before, is a breath of fresh air in this. And nobody will leave him alone. The Republican Party will not back him. Simpson, Crapo, none of them at the start ever backed him. They still don't back him. You see Paul Ryan leaving. You see a bunch of Republicans leaving seats open so they can be taken by Democrats. Hopefully not. And I just don't understand. As far as I'm concerned, they're not even an American. I mean, they don't go for the Constitution. The only time you hear them say anything about the Constitution, David, is when something's not going right for them and they go, well, it's my constitutional right. And I hope, if I vote for you, I hope you stand completely on the Constitution, the Bible, this country, because this is an American republic country.
Oh.
I've even asked Kevin about that before. It's not a democracy.
You're right.
And I wish somebody would preach this in Congress.
Well,
I mean, I know
let's,
the
hey,
Democrats are
Doug,
going to be
right.
deaf.
Doug, let's hear what David Leroy has to say.
Well, Doug, I'm a bit of a preacher on that. I am a constitutional conservative. My literature says so, and I've been 45 or 47 years in the practice of law. And I have 3 times appeared before the United States Supreme Court arguing cases where I defended and advocated Idaho's state sovereignty. So I truly do believe that one of the problems, greatest problems with this country is that we have wandered away from the rule of law. And, of course, that law and the rule all begin and theoretically should end with the metes and bounds of our Constitution. Your comment is very well taken. A lot of the difficulty we're having in Congress, a lot of this Comey mischief that Kevin's been talking about this morning, all runs right back to failing to observe lawful procedure and be consistent under the Constitution. And that's part of that problem is Congress. We have failed in the Congress in recent years to defend even the Congress's role under the Constitution. Your comment is well taken, and I am a constitutional conservative.
Doug, thank you for the call. 580-5436, 580-KIDO. Let's get back to the campaign. What's the big issue on the trail that you're hearing about from the folks?
Well, I think the big issue, in all likelihood, and our poll suggested that, surprisingly, is people are concerned about the defense of their constitutional rights. That's very broad and encompassing, but it includes Second Amendment rights, the right to keep and bear arms. It includes freedom of speech-related issues. It includes all of the kinds of things that are potentially at jeopardy. One of the reasons people are moving here from California, one of the reasons that people come over here to gun shows like the one in Post Falls where I was shaking hands the other day and wish they were living in Idaho is that we have a reasonably full plate full of constitutional liberties here that we enjoy. And people in Idaho have both come here and continue to live here because they want to live free under the Constitution. Our economy is moving back and booming. We need to do a lot of things with our natural resource industries to strengthen them. But in fact, when you walk the streets of small towns such as I have, people are often concerned about a particular constitutional right.
More on that with David Leroy. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Really enjoying our time here with David Leroy, Kevin Miller in the morning. Phone number is 580-5436. We'll talk a little bit about James Comey and other things and the law and obviously Abraham Lincoln, President Lincoln. You know, it's funny because every time we talk about Lincoln, I don't know, do you get the postcards from the guy?
I do.
You're on the postcard list. You, Mike Miniger, Tea Party Bob, and me, yes.
And of course, it's particularly personal to me because if you're attacking Lincoln as these postcards do, you're attacking me. I'm Mr. Lincoln in Idaho. I defend the brand.
Right.
So
you're on the postcard guy list.
I am, and I'm not sure how I got there, but I do receive them.
I'm sorry, and he listens every day. And
well, I frankly, I would like 2 things from the postcard guy today if he's listening. Number one, I wouldn't mind his return address so I can send him back a note. And I would secondly like to have him expand on why he thinks Lincoln is such an evil man. Give me the arguments and maybe we can get into a dialogue.
All right, our great friend David Leroy. Let's continue on. Hank in Boise on KIDO Talk Radio. Hello, Hank.
Yes, hello. I'd like to ask 2 questions about the congressional race and then 1 trivia question about Lincoln. First point is, where do you differ from Russ Fulcher? What would you do differently from Russ Fulcher if you're elected to Congress? And 2, what makes you feel you're more qualified than Russ Fulcher? Because I believe that the race is indeed between you and Russ Fulcher as far as who's going to be the next Republican congressman from the 1st District. And my trivia question about Lincoln is
well, Hank, you can hang on the phone. We're not going to get rid of you. How about that?
Save the trivia. The difference, I think, between Russ and I is my considerable experience will allow me to go to work immediately in Washington, D.C. We've just talked about, and again, this weekend is going to be all about James Comey and his attacks on the president. The Comey attacks are wrapped up in the Mueller investigation. And as I've mentioned briefly, and as perhaps you know in terms of my background, not only was I a prosecutor with an investigator staff, I was Attorney General that built the modern investigator staff. And in my opinion, the next 1st District congressman, if he can get on the Judiciary Committee and on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, can make a substantial contribution to what Doug was concerned about, the constitutional lawfulness of this country. With my credentials, as I've outlined them and as I've lived them for 45 years with the law training I have, makes me an eligible candidate, I think, go right to the heart of the controversy in this country to straighten out a lot of those sorts of things. So not only have I run a federal agency, and the last year I was United States nuclear waste negotiator, I returned 34% of the money Congress appropriated me to the taxpayers because I didn't need to spend it. So I'm a legitimate, experienced Washington federal bureaucrat who actually did something for the nation. I'm a lawyer with the background to make me eligible to contribute immediately to putting down some of the Comey and Mueller mischief. And I would ask for those specific committees where I could be most effective, not only in those controversies, but also for all the regulations and the natural resource laws and the kinds of things we need to change in this country. Russ has had a good public career, but he has not had any of the kind of public career that makes me especially valuable in this race. And in fact, if you took Russ's experience and gave it all fair weighting, and then you added the experience of all 5 of the other candidates in this race, balance those against my experience, I believe, and my ability to go to Congress and make a difference immediately would be superior to all of theirs put together. I'm eager for your trivia question.
Okay. What was the majority of Lincoln's law practice in, and also what common law action, since Illinois was a common law state back then, what common law action Lincoln most used during his law practice?
Huh.
Oh, those are good questions. Well, you need to tell me how you mean majority. He was a railroad lawyer and earned the majority of his income from railroads, but by virtue of numbers of cases, he probably had more cases dealing with property questions for little people on the circuit than he did for anything else. I am not sure what common law action he would have most been involved in, so you'll have to tell me that one.
Okay. Most of his practice prior to his Illinois Central business was basically debt collection. Basically, Illinois was racked with a depression during the 1840s, and also the common law action he used was the writ of assumption, which was basically breach of contract dealing with debt. In other words, that was the action that he did. Most of his writs that he issued were writs of assumption, basically collection, which basically was breach of non-payment of debt.
Well, Hank, Hank, let me urge you to go by the Idaho Archives building on Old Penitentiary Road. There we have the 5-room permanent museum exhibit, the Abraham Lincoln Legacy exhibit. My wife and I donated a number of those items in that exhibit, and inside that exhibit there are 2 or 3 Lincoln legal documents that he actually wrote out in his own hand. You'll enjoy seeing those.
All right, Hank, thank you very much. We almost got lost in Lincoln traffic and weather together. KIDO Talk Radio, our great friend David Leroy with us. Coming up, we'll have more with can you hang out for a while?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Sure, I'm here.
We'll talk a little James Comey in addition to that at 580-5436. 580-KIDO. You know, you're chomping at the bit to talk about the FBI guy, and I'm like trying to steer you towards your campaign.
Yes, you're doing me a favor, but I, too, like you, am agitated at Mr. Comey. I think he's going to have a very sanctimonious weekend.
Well, you know, I don't know how would you define it, and you've worked at the highest levels, okay? It doesn't get higher than where you've been at the White House, working for the president. Have you ever seen in your lifetime, sir, an FBI director that is selling a book, is tweeting, is going on these shows, portraying himself as a victim?
No, this is a very grievous violation of investigator ethics, the rule of law about which we've been talking. And it started when he first fell out of his role as an investigator and pretended to be a prosecutor, telling us what we should do or shouldn't do with Hillary Clinton. Once he made that mistake, it became compounded, of course, every time he tiptoed toward that investigation and told us more. And now if he's going to go back into White House conversations and not only tell us his version of what happened, but moralize about his feelings and how he has been affected or how the nation should react to this or that perception of his. It's a very grave violation of anything that an investigator should do, particularly the top federal investigator, the director of the Bureau. He decries that Trump threatens the Bureau. I think Comey's actions are orders of magnitude more threatening to the Bureau when he plays out his role as a bookseller and a pundit and moralizer to the nation.
Couldn't see Louis Freeh doing this.
No, not at all. And even J. Edgar Hoover was a much more closed fellow than Comey seems to be.
Right. More coming up with David Leroy. You're listening to Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Maggie. KIDO Talk Radio. If you have a question for David Leroy, 580-5436, 580-KIDO. Now we're joined by, actually somebody that continues to cost us listeners, and that is Liberal Steve on KIDO Talk Radio. I had another complaint about you today, sir.
And like I care.
That's a good point. Duly noted.
Doesn't Comey now, as a private citizen, as a Miller, as a liberal Steve, have the right to say and do everything he wants to do as long as it's within the law?
Yeah, liberal Steve, good point. Sure, he does, except that in his prior duties as director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, he was bound by certain codes of ethics that applied to all of his activities during that period of time. So just as our CIA members and our military people with insider information are bound by the oath that they took and the obligations under the law when they do things of that nature, so do those obligations continue when they become a private citizen, whether they leave voluntarily, whether they retire, or whether they're fired by the president. So my objection to him is that he is kissing and telling, and that's not appropriate.
So what? Is anything our president's done? Anything appropriate? Don't broadcast to the enemy and then broadcast to the enemy and then turn it around. You know, I'm tired of these Republicans whose mouth can hold more than their belly can keep preaching against what is wrong.
Well, Steve,
it's not.
I understand that you may have, with the nomiker liberal attached to your first name, lots of complaints with the president, and I don't always like the words he chooses and the names he calls. But the fact is that if we're going to stand for the rule of law and consistently protect both liberals and conservatives under the Constitution, we have to expect that the law enforcement officers are going to be the first line of defense and act consistently with their obligations. And in that regard, Comey is the biggest offender that's come along, liberal or conservative, for a long, long while.
Would you say that under oath?
Absolutely. I've got my hand raised at this very moment.
All right, Liberal Steve, good call. 580-5436, 580-KIDO. David Leroy with us as we take a look at these big issues. Let's talk immigration.
Great place to begin with big issues because there are very few bigger. You know, we were all poised to solve a comprehensive immigration issue by linking the Goodlatte bill, a bill that's still pending in the House of Representatives that does a number of things, eliminates the lottery, trims down chain migration, gives green cards to the DACA people, and all of that package was tied to the first bill related to taxes, and we were going to pass that in a way and at a time that avoided a government shutdown. We were so close to a deal, and then that all fell apart, and we wandered off, etc. The last time we passed a comprehensive immigration policy bill in this country, the Beatles had a #1 record, and we had not yet put a man on the moon. Well, do you think we're overdue with that? And particularly when you link that to the issues of border security, we need immigration, and we need it now. And that certainly has to be among the top priorities particularly in the context of border security. December 29th last year, I actually went down to the border so I could see for myself what kind of wall we needed and what kind of issues there were there. One of the elected sheriffs, the sheriff of Valverde County, gave me about 6 hours of his time, and we walked and drove along the border so that I could see exactly where we needed more physical structures, where the natural barriers like cliffs and deserts served, where we needed more technical detection, and he talked to me about more personnel. So border security, immigration are critical issues, and unfortunately, right now, there's absolutely no movement on that in either the House or the Senate. It's a critical crime and a critical problem for the country.
Speaking of the country, a country that you love and a country that you've served, culturally, where are we? We used to come together from all ethnicities. It used to be the melting pot. Some people say it's a salad bowl. You have enclaves. You have the illegal immigration question. And then you balance it with the uniquely Idaho challenge where you have migrant workers coming in and going out and that sort of thing. You're familiar with the dairy and the ranching industry. So it's not black and white. Yet on the other hand, we do have to do something about the American culture.
Oh, certainly. Our immigration bill and our immigration approach in Idaho needs to be Idaho-centric, Idaho-sensitive to our employment needs, to our families who are here. All of those things do need to come together. I do think that every member of Congress and every senator, every political official at every level has an obligation to try to bring us together, to build a greater unity. We are a polyglot of cultures, and that's always been America. But we find so many reasons now to be more divided than we do to have common interests. And among the common interests we ought to have is a comprehensive immigration review. Among the common interests we ought to have is trimming government down to a size that's sustainable and affordable. And we really have nobody preaching those common themes anymore. It's all division. Were I elected to Congress, I would, when I come back from Congress, to talk to the Rotary or to visit a school, I would try to challenge the constituents here to do something to build the country, to find some unanimity, and to do that in each encounter with those speeches or those people.
To the phones we go. Cindy in Caldwell joins us now on KIDO Talk Radio. Hello, Cindy. I was in your town yesterday.
Well, Yahoo for Caldwell. I was here all day making calls. Sir, Kevin, thank you so much. I don't know you, sir, but I would say that this is the best interview with a politician I ever heard. I have learned so much about you. I'm going to say Mr. Leroy, and it really is interesting that I could say this as far along as I am. I guess I'm going to be an undecided voter, but I was so impressed, sir, by your ability to see, and so thank you, Kevin, for this interview. Sir, I liked what you said about wanting to be on or thinking you could serve on a committee to help our president, because I do see what you would bring to Washington, and listening to you is just that, trying to come alongside our president, not using the name Trump. I liked what you said about that. But also on the committee you could be on to be some, to have some purpose. It has saddened me that with the Mueller and the other attacks by Mr. Comey, the attacks on Paul Manafort and Mr. Cohen, I just think are so unethical, but you are so reasoned and so educated. I just hope that it's going to be, how can I put this? That you're being, I would say, transparent, and that if on that committee you would support our president. And that's saddening. It saddened me because I see a lot of Republicans who have chosen to say and do nothing.
Well, Cindy, thank you for the very kind compliment and your observations. And you're right. This Mueller investigation continues to wander along, and for every day and every hour and every minute we spend ruminating about Russians who've never been colluding with anybody about anything, so far as we all know and so far as the House has determined. We divert from the national priorities, and we are not solving the problems. We are really causing the president a great deal of grief and diverting him from his legitimate role as commander of the Army and chief of the administration of the government. To the extent that we can get back to business as usual, it would be a great relief for every American, including, as you tell me, you today. I would be honored to try to contribute to that focus and the refocus of this country on solving our problems. And Mueller needs to wrap it up, go home, and once we can do that, if we haven't started too many corollary and collateral investigations, we ought to be at least able to make a step back towards solving the country's problems. Thank you for the compliments. I'm impressed.
No, thank you, sir. Coming from a military family, you know what? I would follow you into battle. I am just almost, I'm sort of overwhelmed by what you've been saying because I feel that I could trust you, and I just am so grateful to hear someone like you. Kevin, this was the best interview that I've heard from a politician, and you know, you started off not being vitriolic, not with attacks, even with your opponent, when you mentioned something about Michael Snyder. So I want to thank you also that you have such a reasoned approach and the ability to just get to the issues. Thank you, sir. This has been a morning par none for me, listening to a true politician and statesman.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you, Cindy. More phone calls next with David Leroy, KIDO Talk Radio. David Leroy with us as we continue on. More questions. It's interesting. We were talking about campaigning off the air for a moment here at KIDO Talk Radio. And I would say that, you know, there are various ways of getting your message out, whether it's digitally, whether it's this, whether it's that, whether it's paid advertising. But I would still have to say, I'm sorry, I'm going to be accused of leading the witness here. But the power of the spoken word, how strong is that in comparison to everything else to get your message out?
Well, even TV and radio employ the spoken word, but if you have a chance, as I've had, to get in front of a Rotary group and give a non-political speech, or Republican Lincoln Days, as we've had nearly a dozen of those up and down the 1st District, I think it's a spectacular opportunity to both listen and learn from the people who happen to be in the room. Now, some of these Lincoln Days we'll go to have got 30 real people and about 150 people traveling with the candidates, each of whom is given a minute to introduce themselves and then dance off the stage.
Right.
So some of these speaking opportunities are modest, but even those, I think, give the people who are listening and paying attention a very sharp perspective on who says what and how they say it. And so I think retail politics is alive and well in Idaho.
Again, again, like I said, it amazes me the art of communicating in this digital world.
Yeah. And again, it's important to look somebody in the eye, I think, and perceive a bit about their character from what they say and how they say it and how they present themselves, their physical bearing. It's exciting for me to meet and talk to and listen to people on the trail. And it's nice to be doing that again after 20 years out of politics.
Traffic and weather together, and we go back to the phones with David Leroy. Let's go to Terry, formerly of State College, Pennsylvania. Good morning, Terry.
Good morning, Kevin. Good morning, Mr. Leroy, and thank you for being available for the interview.
You're welcome.
Question for you, if I could. My wife and I's personal attorney back east, he was a constitutionalist as well as a deputy attorney general at a point. And I have other friends that are attorneys, and then I say carefully, I have acquaintances that were criminal attorneys.
Was that they were prosecuted, or they helped those who are?
Let's set them free. Question for you, if I could, and I've always struggled with this, and maybe you can help me. Multiple times in our gatherings, I would hear such things as, "Oh, you know this guy's guilty, but I'm committed to defending him." Morally, how does a criminal attorney justify fighting for the good, fighting for the right? I know they deserve their justice.
Sure.
And I don't even. It's a comment, I guess, I'm looking for, not so much of a question.
Yeah.
Could you morally help me understand that.
You obviously, by virtue of the framework of your question, understand the constitutional right to have an attorney who is competent to defend your interests consistent with court procedures and the law. But the moral side of that really is that people are troubled often by their own weaknesses or their own bad choices. And to be an advisor to someone like that when you're also an officer of the court is a very human and moral obligation. You simply try to leave these people better than you found them, consistent with the opportunities that they might have in the system.
This is a good answer.
Yeah, and human to human, you can find some spark of utility or even sometimes good in the most heinous of people. It's sad that people can't all be virtuous at all moments in their lives, but we all have foibles and weaknesses. And if you are truly morally offended by the acts of an individual defendant who presents themselves to you, then you simply don't take that case.
Terry, we got to run, but thank you. All right, Terry. Pete in Mountain Home, quickly for David Leroy at KIDO Talk Radio.
Yeah, real quick suggestion. Given the politicization of the FBI headquarters, looking at what Comey is doing and Mueller and all the rest of them down there, which is basically, I think, an attempted coup against the duly elected President of the United States. You get back there to Congress, I think Congress should take a hard look at dissolving the FBI.
Well, that's an interesting idea, probably one that's doomed to failure, but we certainly need to reform it. And if a new director cannot be found who's above the fray, there certainly will be great damage to the institution.
I think it's more than just the director. I think you get back there in Washington, and it seems to me it goes pretty deep.
Well, that's why I'd like to be on that House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, because I'd like to kick the tires and kick the boxes and see what crawls out, make it a better place, and make it consistent with the rule of law.
And that is the key right there. Are they above the law or aren't they?
Well, and that's and Mueller and Comey are two guys that are poster children for doing that. If Mueller will wrap it up and do his job, he wins. But Comey has flunked the test consistently, and this is going to be a bad weekend for the rule of law in America when he does his interview and continues to push his book.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go to Rob in Nampa with David Leroy at KIDO Talk Radio.
Hey, good morning, my friends. Tim and Norm, my brother by another mother. Hopefully I can do this. And David Leroy, God bless you. I must say to the people of Idaho, you are probably the most honest to a tune of 100,000% constitutional scholar and AG that was in Idaho. My big problem is, and you remember this because you were the champion of it, and I always remember you for this since I was a kid in the 80s. The gas prices would be $1 a gallon. They jump up like 10 cents in one day. You'd be out there going, hey, what is going on here in front of the microphone? I don't know, Shazam. It's like Forrest Gump idiot door getting the campaign, Tony Maloney Chinese campaign funds for the Chicoms in '96 presidential election. Yeah, woo, what do you know? Instantly they would change their pace. What is your opinion, which I'd love for you, Kevin Miller, to get our corrupt Mormon AG, which I consider him that, on your show so I can definitely take him apart. Anyway,
well,
so David,
Rob,
what's your opinion on the gas prices going on right now, where the national average is what?
Okay, Rob, we've got about a minute for David to answer your questions.
Well, Rob, thanks for the question. I'm not going to buy into all of your premises there, but I appreciate the compliment to where you referred to the fact that when I was Attorney General, I, from time to time, would be offended by what appeared to be an untoward and unwarranted excessive jump in gas pricing. And, of course, we've just seen, I think, a huge 60 cent or so gas price jump in the last few weeks here in Idaho. I'm concerned about that, and, of course, I'm paying at the pump for that. We need to, anytime those things come up, raise them with the legitimate authorities, and that is, of course, the Idaho Attorney General's office. Not much role for a prospective congressman in that, but I appreciate the compliment that when I held that role of Attorney General, I held those prices down as best I could.
Okay, Rob, thank you for the call. Steve and Star, sorry we didn't get a chance to get to you. Mr. Leroy, if people would like more information, what can they do to get a hold of you?
Our website is LeroyForIdaho.com. People can actually call me at my law office, 208-342-0000. My personal email is dave@dleroy.com, but check our website, LeroyForIdaho.com. I'd love to be your next 1st District Congressman.
Thank you, sir.
This is where Idaho